Today on Know the Truth with Philip De Courcy.
To get someone's respect is a wonderful gift. For them to believe you're the real deal, that your walk with God is real, that your love of life is passionate, that your commitments are strong. Somebody can't give you much more than give you their respect. It's a beautiful thing to have from somebody, where they'll trust you, where they'll look up to you. And that's why you never want to let them down.
Cowboy philosopher Will Rogers said it takes a lifetime to build a good reputation, but you can lose it in a minute. Sadly, leaders with tarnished reputations and questionable integrity are all too common. The life that took years to build can be lost in a moment of indiscretion. Today on Know the Truth, Philip De Courcy reminds us that God is looking for men and women of integrity to lead in their communities, their workplaces, and certainly at home. We're looking at the life of Joseph today. Philip's message is titled, Finding Yourself a Leader.
Well, let's take our Bibles and turn to the book of Genesis and chapter 41. We're at this place in Joseph's life where he has become state president after some years of being a state prisoner. It's an amazing turn of events, all within the sovereignty and providence of God, and he rises to power by God's good hand. And we want to take a look at him as a leader and his leadership. So, Genesis 41, verse 37. We're at a place where Joseph has interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. He has mapped out an answer to the problem of the 7 years of poverty that will follow the 7 years of plenty. And we read, so the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, insomuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and as wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Look at verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Finding yourself a leader. Part of the college application was directed to the applicant's parents. And one of the questions on this application was, would you consider your child to be a leader or a follower? After much deliberation, the father wrote that he felt his son, although very much a unique individual, was really more of a follower than a leader. Not long after, a letter of acceptance arrived from the college to the home, accompanied by a note from the registrar welcoming this father's child with these words, we feel he'll fit in especially well, as he is the only follower in a class of 249 leaders. Leaders need followers. This class needed one follower at least. Leaders need followers, and leaders beget followers. E.V. Hill is famous for the saying, if you want to know that you are a leader, just look over your shoulder and see if anybody is following you. If not, you're just out for a walk. Joseph looks over his shoulder and finds the nation of Egypt following him. In the passage before us, Pharaoh finds himself a leader, and Joseph finds himself a leader. I think much to his surprise, but certainly within the providence of God and no surprise to the Almighty, Joseph talks himself into a job, and suddenly the state prisoner becomes the state president. And I want to look at Joseph as a leader, for we're always looking for leaders in the church, in the home, in the nation. We're always looking for leaders, and we're always looking for what leaders look like. The past shows us that our future is bound up in the rise and rule of godly leaders. And if you remember back to the study before this one, we gathered our thoughts concerning Joseph's leadership around three ideas. His providential emergence, his personal excellence, and his practical expertise. And we covered that first thought, his providential emergence. We saw that it was some years before God placed Joseph into the sphere of leadership that he had promised him so many years ago in the dream. And how his father and his family would bow down before him. Joseph wasn't ready for leadership. He had to be tested. He had to be proven. He had to be developed. Too much too soon ruins young leaders. But as he emerges mature, competent, developed in his character. He has been tested and he has been proven faithful and fruitful and forgetful. We saw those marks of maturity. But we're coming to pick up the second thought as we look at Joseph the leader. We have looked at his providential emergence. Let's now look at his personal excellence. Joseph was a man marked by quality and excellence. He stood head and shoulders above the rest. He surfaced among a sea of applicants as the prime candidate for the job. We read in verse 37 of the text before us, so the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. Remember, the Pharaoh had scoured the country for an answer to his dreams. The best and the brightest in Egypt didn't step up to the plate. Here's this young Jewish Hebrew, and the advice that he gives this man of great power and stature is good in his own eyes and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh says, can we find such a one as this? A man in whom is the Spirit of God? Joseph was not Pharaoh's second choice. This wasn't the case of he'll do until we find somebody. Joseph was top drawer in terms of his character and his competency. He deserved pole position. There was an excellence about him. He had been tried and he had been tempered in the furnace of affliction, and the dross had been removed, and his character had become solid steel and solid gold in terms of its qualities and character. Leaders and the servants of God need to be men and women of excellence and quality and nobility. Now, for a few moments, let me just expand on that, explain that further. And I want to gather these thoughts around ABC. What are the ABCs of excellence? What ought to mark you and me in the arenas of influence that we have? Because when we begin to influence, we begin to lead. Here's the ABCs of excellence. Good leaders, number one, accept responsibility. Accept responsibility. What a moment it was when Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of the nation's affairs. Can you imagine that? You know, his mouth must have dropped open and his head must have spinned as Pharaoh in quick succession basically says in verse 40, hey, I found my man, Joseph, you shall rule over my house and all my people. Now get the context, he has just stepped out of prison. He's just shed his dungarees. And now he's in fine linen and a chain of office has been put around his neck. But you know what? He accepts the responsibility. What a thrill and what a privilege. Joseph steps up to the plate. He doesn't shrink back. It's a huge task where he risked the wrath of Pharaoh if he failed. The nation of Egypt and its welfare hung in the balance, and Joseph would soon find out that the welfare of Jacob's house itself hung in the balance of his leadership. He was no clerk in a mom and pop store. He was second only to Pharaoh, the text tells us. But this leader, this young Hebrew, takes the tiger by the tail. He took on the burden of leadership, I think soberly, but gladly. Throughout his life, he had cared and he had carried his responsibilities well. And I think he was driven by a number of things. He was driven by God's glory. He accepted the responsibility as an assignment from God, as a stewardship, and anything God gave him to do, he did well. Because he knew he was culpable before God's throne. You see this in his response, don't you, to Potiphar's wife when she tries to seduce him. In verse 9 of chapter 39, how can I then do this great wickedness and sin against God? Later on in his first encounter with his brothers in Genesis 42, verse 18, we read, then Joseph said to them, the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. I fear God. He accepts his responsibility under the gaze of God, to the end that God may be glorified. He took his responsibilities seriously because he took God seriously. And he took them as assignments and stewardships from heaven itself. And he sought the welfare of others. He sought Egypt's welfare. That was the assignment that Pharaoh gave him in chapter 41, verse 41. See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. And he took that responsibility seriously. In fact, he will later learn that the very welfare of his family was what was also at stake. In chapter 45, he'll tell his brothers not to be angry with themselves because he come to realize that God had sent him before them to preserve life. The welfare of Egypt, he saw that with foresight. The welfare of the house of Jacob, he came to understand that with hindsight. But he bore all those responsibilities. And what's true of leaders specifically or officially is true of all of us. If we bear any kind of responsibility, take that responsibility seriously. Because God's glory hangs in the balance. The welfare of others' bodies and souls and minds and innocence hangs in the balance also. Whether we're a pastor or a parent. Throughout his life, Joseph cared deeply for God, and Joseph cared deeply for others. And I think that is a glorious quality. It's one of the ABCs of excellence. Think about the responsibilities that God has given you and me in this church, in our homes, in our communities, and take that responsibility seriously. Excellence accepts responsibility. Secondly, excellence begets recognition. The book of Proverbs in Proverbs 18, verse 16 says that gift makes room for itself. What's the point? This is the observation of the wise sages of Israel. This is a generally true observation. Remember, the Proverbs are not promises. They're not cast iron guarantees. They're observations of wise men who say generally within the providence of God, you'll find this is the way life shakes out. And usually a man who's gifted and excellent and takes his responsibilities seriously and executes them well, you'll find he will beget, he will receive recognition. Gift makes room for itself. Proverbs 18:16. Joseph was such a leader, wasn't he? He begets recognition. I mean, Pharaoh, he says, we read it, can we find such a one as this? Hey, I don't know about you, but this kid is impressing me. And no doubt the butler was speaking in his ear and saying, everything you see in him now, I saw in him then. And Joseph had a tremendous testimony. The butler recognized it. Pharaoh recognized it. Others recognized it. It's a very simple thought, but it's a good thought. As we look at his providential emergence and we look at his personal excellence, we see that others came to see what God saw all along and God put in Joseph's life. You see this principle worked out in Acts chapter 6 also. Just the whole idea that excellent leaders beget recognition. People will see it. People will discover it in them. They won't have to bring it to the attention of others. Others will see it for themselves. You've got this situation. The church is growing. Some things are falling through the cracks. The apostles say, you know what? We got to give ourselves to the word. We got to pick out some men who will give themselves to the tables. And here's what they say in verse 3. Therefore, brethren, seek out from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. Verse 5, and the saying pleased the people, the whole multitude. And they chose Stephen, listen, a man full of faith and the Holy Spirit. There was a match. They connected the dots. As soon as they heard from the apostles, here's the kind of guy you ought to be looking for. A man full of faith and wisdom and the Holy Spirit. You know what? It didn't take them long. A few of them just automatically turned to each other and said, hey, Stephen? Yes, Stephen. A man full of faith and the Holy Spirit. Stephen begat recognition. Cream rises to the surface. And so I think that's important. Joseph begat recognition. Leaders earn the respect of others through their godliness and their giftedness. That's not to say that leaders won't grow or that they come as a complete package, but there will be enough in them and others will see it and others will embrace it. I like the story of the pastor who was presenting himself to a church for candidacy, and he began sharing his vision, and he began setting out multiple demands and directions for the church and what they needed to do. And he had a video with him from his well-known evangelist father, challenging the people to follow this guy without question. And an elderly member of the church who served on the church staff for years listened intently, and leaning over to a friend nudged him and said, boy, he's sure asking for an awful lot on credit. Good leaders don't ask for things on credit. Others will recognize their wisdom and they will follow naturally. They won't have to be cajoled or badgered or intimidated by degrees or recommendations from others. Last thought here. Excellence accepts responsibility, begets recognition, and commands respect. This is the ABCs of excellent leadership. Good and godly leaders command respect. It's a bit of a piggyback here off the former thought. They will not only gain recognition, they will indeed command respect. And again, it won't be forced. It'll be given. As a leader, Joseph had gained total respect from both the godly and the ungodly. That's one of the striking things about him. He was a magnet in terms of people's loyalties and people's respect for him. They saw an honest heart. They saw a pure character. They encountered a kind disposition. They saw in him a godly fear, and they respected him. They saw him stay pure in the midst of filth and corruption. They saw him be faithful when people were looking and when people weren't looking. We won't go over all of this, but I think from the text he commanded the respect of his fathers. We did identify Jacob's favoritism, and it would be right to note that, but I think you also need to see in his love for Joseph, there was a quality to this young man, a quality that God would bless in the days to come. He saw something in Joseph he didn't see in the brothers. In fact, when we get into some of the later chapters, you're going to see when the brothers come down in that whole scenario where they're sent back up to get Benjamin, you'll see that the father won't release Benjamin. If you read the words, it's almost as if Jacob had eyes on to them. I'm not sending Benjamin with you lot. And something bad will befall of him. There was something in Joseph, something that was very attractive and admirable in this son for the father. He commanded Potiphar's respect. I think I've made note of this just to refresh your mind. Why didn't Potiphar execute, lop the head off Joseph when Potiphar's wife said, you know what? He tried to take advantage of me. I mean, you're dead on the spot in that culture, but he's not. Seems to infer that while Potiphar had to save face and cart Joseph off to prison, it almost seems to me an inherent admission, you know what, I'm not sure I believe her. It was this respect he commanded from his father, from Potiphar, and you see it immediately in this context that he gains respect. This is one of the marks of leaders. They command people's respect because there's a seriousness and a soberness and a reality to what that leader's doing, that you know, while he's not a perfect man or she's not a perfect woman, there's an authenticity there. There's authority there, and it's not just cold, weighty authority. There's the life and leadership of God being manifest through them. You see that in Jesus, Matthew 7, verse 29. We read that the people said he spoke with authority, unlike the scribes and the Pharisees. Jesus commanded respect because he denounced those leaders, right? Later on in Matthew 23, where he says, they say, but they do not. They tell you to do stuff they don't do. The elder in 1 Timothy 3 verse 7 is said that he ought to have a good report of those who are on the outside. Leaders ought to command respect. Joseph did. Listen to me. I speak this to myself. It's a great thing to command someone's respect. Somebody can't give you much more than give you their respect. It's a beautiful thing to have from somebody, where they'll trust you, where they'll look up to you. That's why you never want to let them down. To get someone's respect is a wonderful gift. For them to believe you're to the real deal, that your walk with God is real, that your love of life is passionate, that your commitments are strong. When you get to a certain point in life, your friends say, you know what? You're the real deal, and we love you, warts and all. We respect you, we admire you for who you are as a man, as a father, and as a friend.
Like Joseph, we have people looking to us for leadership and direction. You're listening to Know the Truth with Philip De Courcy in the second part of a message titled Finding Yourself a Leader. To replay or share this message, download the KTT app or podcast. Just search for Know the Truth with Philip De Courcy, or you can access Pastor Philip's message archive online at ktt.org. And if this ministry has blessed you, while you're on that website, consider how you can help others know the truth by giving a one-time gift or becoming a monthly Truth Ambassador. Philip?
As we conclude today's lesson on biblical leadership, I hope Joseph's example has both challenged and inspired you. Remember, true leadership isn't about position or power. It's about character and influence. Leaders who accept responsibility, beget recognition, and command respect will make a lasting difference. If you're in a leadership role, whether a parent, boss, teacher, or mentor, strive for the personal excellence that Joseph displayed. And remember that the respect of others is a precious gift that should never be taken lightly. If you've been blessed by this message, I invite you to share it with someone in your life. And don't forget, you can find more resources to deepen your faith at our website, ktt.org. Until next time, this is Philip De Courcy reminding you to know the truth, live the truth, and share the truth. May God bless you as you lead with excellence this week.
Thank you, Philip. I'm Wayne Shepherd. Be sure to join us next time when we continue our study of the life and leadership of Joseph with our Bible teacher, Philip De Courcy. That's next time on Know the Truth. Today's program was produced and sponsored by Know the Truth Incorporated. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."